News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on the farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm. Spend a little more in the store for a tag. In the back it says USA.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. Thank you for joining us today. Every week on this show, we review the news, and even more important than that, we uphold values that are never, ever, ever going to die. And the cardinal value that we uphold is an adherence to the Constitution of the United States of America. And that is why this week it is with a heavy heart, but a determined heart, that I begin this broadcast saying that we must impeach President Barack Hussein Obama. He is a threat to our national security. I want everyone out there to listen very carefully. The President of the United States must be impeached. What has transpired over the last week is nothing short of treason. He has betrayed us in the worst way that a president can betray the American people. The president has released 5 heinous men from captivity. They are commanders who have committed unspeakable crimes. Some are wanted as war criminals by the International Criminal Court. These men are dangerous. They have been classified as high risk again and again and again by those who reviewed their file. Our president has released them. And it doesn't matter why or how. It doesn't matter that he released them in a so-called exchange to get an American soldier back. That is an irrelevant point. What is most important is that by releasing these men, our very own president is working against us. He is threatening our security. And there is no greater breach of trust that could have befallen us. There is no greater act of disloyalty that he could have committed. When I heard this, I could not believe what I was hearing. And I say this as a historian who has spent over 10 years literally in a library to obtain a doctoral degree in history, where I immersed myself in a knowledge of the past. And yet the present, what I heard breaking on the news on Sunday morning, was unprecedented in my view, unbelievable, stupefying, outrageous, but more than all of that, the president has crossed a Rubicon from which he can never ever return, because he has demonstrated to all of us now, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that he must be removed. For the last few years, we have been talking about one scandal after the other. And each of these are alarming and disturbing and outrageous, culminating most recently in the Veterans Affairs scandal. The head of that division, Eric Shinseki, recently resigned. He was pushed out. And I was going to begin a show thinking that I was going to talk about how the commander-in-chief should resign based on the Veterans Affairs scandal. We haven't even begun to explore the depths of deplorable conduct in that scandal. And that follows Benghazi and the IRS and Navy SEAL Team 6 and the scandal of the surveillance state. One after the other, almost every single day in the last couple of months, there has been bad news, disturbing news, and worst of all, news that some part of our republic is being assaulted, some part of our republic is being denigrated, some part of our republic is being destroyed. Most recently, the president has embarked on a series of executive actions, arbitrarily deciding what laws he will enforce and what laws he will ignore. When it came to the disastrous rollout of Obamacare, he, by fiat, decided what provisions he would keep and what he would ignore. Essentially, telling Congress, you are irrelevant. When it comes to the discussion of illegal immigrants, he has used his executive authority to do what he deems best, telling Congress, you are irrelevant. And now, once again, in an unforgivable act, he has defied a very statement that he signed whereby he was supposed to notify Congress 30 days before any detainee from Guantanamo was to be released or transferred or given up or whatever. He defied that. And he released these 5 men. We can talk and talk and talk about whether or not we should impeach him now, whether or not we should wait for after we take over the midterm, if we do succeed in reclaiming the Senate. We can talk about all that. But I am urgently asking all of you to join me in a determined, unrelenting, persistent crusade to impeach this man from office. And I tell you, I do not believe that we have the luxury of time any longer. I do not believe that we can wait. I am that alarmed. I am that concerned about the actions that he is taking. What he did by releasing our enemies, it's all smoke and mirrors as to why he did it. But it is as though, and I want you to imagine this, can you imagine if we had Osama bin Laden in our possession and then we released him? Would it matter what the reason is? It doesn't matter. It's like releasing a nuclear bomb against us. Those 5 men are like a ticking time bomb that is going to be dropped upon all of us. And if he can do this, he's going to do worse. And that is why on this broadcast today, I am deeply alarmed. I fear what he will do next. I fear for all of us because it is patently clear that he is not working for us. He is not working in our best interest. Many times I am asked, in all the interviews I do across this country, do you think that there's some kind of plot that he's been cooking? Do you think he's deliberately malicious? Or do you think he's simply incompetent? You know what? At this point, even that question is now irrelevant. It doesn't matter if he's incompetent, insane, stupid, malicious, arrogant, disengaged. It doesn't matter. He's dangerous. And he has got to go. And I do not think that we can wait. That is how concerned I am. Because he has shown that he has no regard for Congress, which means he has no regard for the American people. He has no regard for the history of this country, for its traditions, for its customs. And clearly, he has no regard for the well-being of the American people. Because there is no way to justify the release of 5 sworn enemies of the United States. He must be impeached, and we have to begin that campaign now. Senator Lindsey Graham has come out and said, well, if he releases another detainee from Guantanamo, then he's going to be impeached. What's the difference between releasing another one and the ones that he's just done? The Republicans are alarmed. Even some Democrats are alarmed. And the chatter, the real chatter in this country right now, the conversations that people are having on the phone, not what the mainstream media is reporting, but what I'm talking about to my fellow journalist friends, to my sources, what I'm talking about to my family members, and what I'm hearing everywhere. He is a danger to us. And unless we act quickly, something terrible will happen to this great land. He has shown us that he is not telling us the truth. And a combination of willful deceit, constant disregard for the laws of this land, on top of an actual dangerous act like what he just did, means that this is beyond political gamesmanship. This is beyond right now. What we are confronting right now is beyond winning or losing elections. It's even beyond, are we going to save our constitutional republic? My fellow Americans, I am so alarmed at the treachery in the Oval Office. I believe that we are all literally, physically in danger because he is obviously collaborating with America's worst, most determined, most vicious, and heinous enemies. And unless we take action quickly, before we know it, it may be too late. And therefore, President Barack Hussein Obama must unequivocally, without doubt, without question, be impeached by the American people.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Welcome back to American Heartland. I don't know about you, but I was sickened by the performance of National Security Advisor Susan Rice on the Sunday talk show, in which she explained what the president had done. This woman is clearly in way over her head. She actually came on, often smiling, acting as though she was delivering a piece of fabulous news that was going to make our Sunday, just so peachy. A peachy Sunday. This is what she reported, that the president had swapped 5 Taliban commanders for one American sergeant who had been held in captivity for 5 years. And she explained that the sergeant that we were liberating was a really great guy, and that this whole deal was absolutely fabulous for the United States of America. Roll it.
Certainly, anybody who's been held in those conditions in captivity for 5 years has paid an extraordinary price. But that is really not the point. The point is that he's back. He's going to be safely reunited with his family. He served the United States with honor and distinction. And we'll have the opportunity eventually to learn what has transpired in the past years. But what's most important now is his health and well-being, that he have the opportunity to recover in peace and security and be reunited with his family, which is why this is such a joyous day.
Oh, what a joyous day. What a joyous day indeed. You know, the panel that analyzed her comments shortly thereafter, this occurred on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, even they couldn't believe that she would actually use the word joyous. Even if you take a position where you want to defend what this administration has done, you would certainly talk about this, explaining that it was a difficult decision and that it was painful and that it has consequences that may be detrimental to the United States. I mean, that's the best you could say, even if you're trying to give it a really positive spin. Instead, she actually tried to tell us that it's a joyous moment when 5 of the world's worst men are released. And even worse than how she characterized all of this was how she characterized Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. She said he served with honor and distinction, when she certainly knew that he had willingly deserted his post. He left his fellow Americans and walked off. And where did he walk to? Did he try to get back to the United States? No. By all accounts, he walked trying to find the Taliban because he believed that America's participation in the war was wrong. Now, these are known facts. They were reported on even before this story broke. How on earth could she characterize this as having served with honor and distinction? That tells you something. It tells you that she wasn't interested in explaining the truth of the situation to the American people. She was there to lie. She was there to try to cook up a feel-good story. To the administration's shock, the American people don't feel good about this story. And many insiders, White House insiders, have leaked that the White House is surprised at the backlash. Why are they surprised? They're surprised at the backlash, particularly because of the events surrounding Bo's disappearance from his base. At the heart of all this, a big scandal has emerged. Who is Bo Bergdahl? He didn't serve with honor and distinction. He walked off, and he walked to find the enemy. Why? And as the days unfolded, family members came forward saying, we know that at least 6 of our boys died in search of him. The uproar and backlash has been so furious that even the homecoming that was scheduled to take place in Sergeant Bo Bergdahl's hometown has now been canceled, and rightfully so. Well, Susan Rice was clearly there to lie to us. And let me explain some of the lies. When she was asked, isn't the president supposed to notify Congress? She said that the president couldn't do that because Beau's health was in such jeopardy that he had to act quickly. 30 days would have been too long. And yet, also during this week, we saw video footage of Beau Bergdahl being handed off to American forces. That video, by the way, was produced by the Taliban. I guess the White House didn't think we would ever be seeing that. And it was posted on the internet, and we now know what Beau Bergdahl looked. I don't see there a very sick man whose health was so on the precipice of collapse that the president couldn't talk to Congress about this. That was clearly a lie. And another lie. She was clearly asked, well, wait a minute, you're going to release 5 of the world's greatest terrorists. And what assurances do we have that they're not going to go and commit terrible deeds? She said, no. They've been released with great restrictions, leading us to believe that somehow they would be jailed, imprisoned elsewhere, monitored carefully. Instead, by the time this story broke everywhere, the president himself was asked, well, wait a minute, what are these restrictions? How long do these restrictions last? Are they under house arrest? What is the nature of their movements? What can they do? What can they not do? Quickly, it was revealed that in Qatar, where they were released, they're moving about freely. Which means what? Which means that obviously they can resume their leadership positions. Nowadays, it doesn't matter where you are. You got a phone? You got the internet? Hey, Mr. President, they have phones and pens there too. With a phone and a pen, you've shown how much you can do. What do you think those released prisoners can do with their phones and their pens? They got phones and pens, and obviously they're going to use them. They can direct war activities from Qatar. It's so obvious that they can. The president is on a trip to Europe, and he's been besieged with questions and questions about this. And when asked, well, how secure, how safe are we in this transfer? This is what he had to say. Roll it, Brittany.
We still get an American soldier back if he's held in captivity. Period. Full stop. We don't condition that. And that's what every mom and dad who sees a son or daughter sent over into war theaters should expect from not just their commander-in-chief, but the United States of America. In terms of potential threats, the release of the Taliban who were being held in Guantanamo was conditioned on the Qataris keeping eyes on them and creating a structure in which we can monitor their activities. We will be keeping eyes on them. Is there the possibility of some of them trying to return to activities that are detrimental to us? Absolutely. That's been true of all the prisoners that were released from Guantanamo. There's a certain recidivism rate that takes place. I wouldn't be doing it if I thought that it was contrary to American national security. And we have confidence that we will be in a position to go after them if, in fact, they are engaging in activities that threaten our defenses.
Well, the president basically engaged in a whole series of moronic statements right there. First of all, he said, we pursue the release of an American, full stop, period. We don't have to condition that. I'm sorry, Mr. President, we do have to condition that. Because you're making a trade. So you're trading 5 threats to the United States for 1 American who is clearly a deserter. So you do condition that. You have to weigh the scales. Who is it that you're rescuing? And what resources do you expend for that rescue in a state of war, which we are clearly still in a state of war? And why now? All of this has to be asked, and none of his answers make sense. Because even if you say we leave no man behind, there are many ways to save somebody that is in captivity. And the timing is also interesting, too. Why now? What's the rush? We're there to win a war. What is the strategic rush? When you ask a commander-in-chief a question about fighting and winning a war, everything has to be based on how does this act get us closer to winning a war? How does the release of Bo Bergdahl, who is clearly insignificant at this point, how does that get us closer to winning this war? How does releasing 5 of the world's greatest terrorists get us closer to winning the war? It doesn't. And that's why, as commander-in-chief, he sounds like a moron. You do condition it, Mr. President. Every war strategy is based on specific conditions. And if you want us to respect you as commander-in-chief, the conditions, the details are the essence of your argument, or the lack thereof. Well, then he went on to say things that are even more ridiculous. That you know who's going to keep an eye on 5 of the world's most dangerous men? Check this out, the Qataris. I feel so safe now, Mr. President. The Qataris are going to look out for us. They're going to monitor them for us. Which is preposterous. Not even if you said a nation like Britain or France or Germany would I be relaxed about monitoring these men. But the Qataris? I have full confidence now, you know? They're going to keep such a watchful eye. And if they should resume jihadist activities, you know what? The Qataris have a reputation for stopping jihad, right? It's preposterous. But then he said, you know, as another bulwark, it's not just the Qataris that are going to look out for them, it's also the United States. And if they should escape the watchful vigilance of the Qataris and the United States, and they should resume their war activities against us, which the president admits is a possibility, you know what this brilliant man has decided? We're going to go back and we're going to grab them again. What an incredible war strategy. What incredible vision and tactics and skill. The President of the United States is clearly a nincompoop. I don't know if he quite grasps how stupid he looks when he speaks this way. Another question that everybody's going to ask is, why would any American soldier risk life and limb to capture somebody again, knowing that there's a possibility that perhaps next Sunday, when Susan Rice wakes up and the president wakes up, they might decide that it's another joyous day in America and time to release him again? Why bother? It's a disaster from start to finish. And his response shows us that he is incompetent, negligent, and there's no other way to say it, but a high threat to the national security of the United States of America. In fact, I have to say, he is the highest threat right now to our nation. You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, and I'm here upholding values that are never going to die.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
So am I wrong for thinking that we could be something for real? Now am I wrong for trying to reach the things that I can't see? But that's just how I feel.
Welcome back to American Heartland. This is Dr. Grace. I'm here to tell you, you're not crazy, liberalism is. And nothing has been crazier than this insane deal that our president embarked upon. The craziest aspect of all this, I mean, even more insane than what he just did, is why he did it. His justification. Releasing Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. Who is this man? Who is he? Why has the president risked the security of all of us? For whom did we do this? Did we do it for a member of Navy SEAL Team 6? Really a war hero? Did we do it for some brave soldier who stood at his command and obeyed his duty, did his duty, obeyed orders, stuck it out even when he wanted to go home? For a soldier that bore the grime, the dirt, the loneliness, the pain of lost comrades, the danger until the end? For somebody who kept his word to his buddies and to the flag, to the American people? No. What did we discover? This soldier, Bo Bergdahl, decided one day that he didn't want to serve. He just got up and he left. Now, can you imagine that? To those boys that relied on him for their safety, he just got up and he left. Listen to how one of the members of his platoon describes the departure. This is from Josh Corder. He served with Bo Bergdahl in Afghanistan.
I mean, he's at best a deserter and at worst a traitor.
At best a deserter and at worst a traitor. But you know what? Even a deserter is a traitor. What greater act of treachery can you do in war than to walk away from your own army, from the army of your nation? The comrades that you have sworn to protect. It's like calling 911 when you're being robbed and two police officers come and one police officer just walks away. What would you think of that person? That is who Bo Bergdahl is. So he betrayed the United States Army. He betrayed his fellows. He betrayed his country by leaving. And he deserves to be court-martialed for that. And what gets worse is, it seems that he deserted to join the Taliban, to join the enemy. To join the enemy to do what? Well, we still don't 100% know. So we don't 100% know, was he actually joining to collaborate with them? But we do know this. Everybody who served with him is coming forward and saying, he's not a hero, he left us, he abandoned us, and perhaps he collaborated even with the other side. The former team leader of his platoon, Sergeant Evan Vuoto, explains it this way.
We were incredibly worried about that. It's impossible to know for a fact if that's what was going on, and it could just be coincidental. But the fact is that we knew from radio interceptions that we've got that he was, before he got in touch with the Taliban, he was looking for someone who spoke English so he could talk to the Taliban. And when we heard that, it told us, okay, he's actively seeking out the Taliban, so at least we know that. And yes, over the next couple months, all the attacks definitely were far more directed. Where before he left, I mean, we'd have IEDs go off, virtually every day, but they were going off in front of the trucks. They were blowing up mine rollers. They were blowing up on the side of the road. Following his disappearance, IEDs started going off directly under the trucks. They were getting perfect hits every time. Their ambushes were very calculated, very methodical, like they knew what we were going to do. Obviously, there's no way to prove that Bergdahl was feeding them that information. At least I cannot do that. He knew our tactics. He knew exactly how we react to certain things. So the fact that that attacks definitely were more directed and calculated, it's incredibly suspicious to me, although there's no way to prove that Bergdahl was feeding them information, whether he was tortured or whether he was giving it on his own accord.
Right. We don't know the answer to that question. But the picture that is emerging is nonetheless a very damning one. Because it is very clear he expressed sympathy, great sympathy, for the Taliban. And Fox News has also reported this week that it appears that Bergdahl converted to Islam and declared jihad while he was in captivity. This information comes from a secret firm that was investigating or keeping tabs on Bergdahl and compiled a huge file on his activities while in captivity. Obviously, the White House knew about this. They knew about the shady aspects surrounding Bo Bergdahl. So they knew, without the shadow of a doubt, that he had not served with honor and distinction, as Susan Rice said. The question, though, has to be asked. The president keeps telling us that our security in the United States is so imperiled. There are so many dangers to us all around, so much so that he's participated in the erection of a surveillance state. Every time he talks about the NSA, he mentions it as it's absolutely essential to the security of every American. So check this out. We are so in danger that all of us, whether we've committed an act or not, must be subjected to our emails being scrutinized if the NSA deems that necessary, our phones being tapped if the NSA deems that necessary, our conversations being listened to. Edward Snowden has said that the NSA even has the power to observe us typing an email before we even send it out, therefore learning our thought patterns. So the logic they've been presenting this whole time is that the jihadists that we're fighting are so dangerous. They could strike us at any time. And because of that, we have to forsake so many of our liberties. All of us are assumed guilty before we're actually proven guilty of anything by this surveillance state. They're allowed to observe what we do because our security is in such jeopardy. And at the very same time, he releases 5 of the most dangerous terrorists in exchange for an individual who is sympathetic to jihad. Does that make any sense to anybody out there? No, it clearly doesn't. And this story gets more bizarre the more we discover it. It's not just Bo Bergdahl whose behavior is now being scrutinized, but also that of his father. The president thought, oh, here, I'm going to have a great photo op. I'm going to announce this prisoner transfer. I'm going to bring the parents into the Rose Garden. And the media is going to embrace me as this great transnational visionary leader. And I'm going to have this man by my side, the father and obviously the mother. And they're all going to say of me, especially in the New York Times, that I ended the war in Afghanistan brilliantly, especially by returning this prisoner of war and by standing shoulder to shoulder with the parents of the man that's going to be returned. He obviously imagined that this was going to go down as one of the great moments in his presidency. But instead, the American people stood there almost aghast when the father spoke. For this is what he said.
I'd like to say to Bo right now, who's having trouble speaking English, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Zayabayem. I'm your father, Bo. To people of Afghanistan, the same. Khalifa al-Thani, the complicated nature of this recovery will never really be comprehended. To each and every single one who affected this in this country, in the service branches, at the State Department, throughout the whole of American government, and around the world at international governments around the world. Thank you so much. We just can't communicate the words this morning when we heard from the President. So we look forward to continuing the recovery of our son, which is going to be a considerable task for our family, and we hope that the media will understand that will keep us very preoccupied in the coming days and weeks as he gets back home to the United States. Thank you all for being here very much.
So guess what? The father was at a loss for words. And you know what happens when I'm at a loss for words? Well, I break out in Pashtun. Yeah, the language of the captors. He's standing there next to our president, speaking in the language of the captors of his son. It's like a Jew, if you could imagine it for a moment, breaking out in German once somebody from a concentration camp was just released. It's preposterous. But more than that, it's very telling. It's very telling that the sympathies of this family, not just Bo Bergdahl, but the father too, obviously, the sympathies of this family do not lie with our traditions and our history and our culture. It's very obvious that at best they are morally equivalent, taking on the attitude that in war, everybody is equally to blame. But the information we got during the course of the week about the father became more and more disturbing. He wants all of the prisoners held at Guantanamo to be freed. And it appears that so does Barack Obama. Many of us are concerned that the president was doing this as a trial balloon to see if he released 5 of these, could he achieve his vaunted goal of shutting down all of that prison without notifying Congress, without the participation of Congress? It looks like the president was willing to stand shoulder to shoulder next to this man because they have the same objective. Release all of America's sworn enemies back into the world. And that moment in the Rose Garden was very revealing, very disturbing, and deserves our censure. You're listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, speaking truth to power.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
You can't start a fire without a spark. This guns for hire, even if we're just dancing in the dark.
Welcome back to American Heartland. This is Dr. Grace. Well, recently we also got the news, perhaps buried with the resignation of Eric Shinseki, we also got the news that the White House press secretary, Jay Carney, is leaving. And I consider this really good news. I have a visceral dislike of this guy. I really despise him. I can't stand to see his face. I'm sorry to confess this to you, but I can't stand this guy. if you look at some of the YouTube clips that we've done throughout the course of this show, in one of them we had Jay Carney's top 10 lies. I said way back then, which was at least a year ago, that Jay Carney should step aside. He's a horrible press secretary. I think he is the worst that I have ever seen. And he's the worst for several reasons. And I'll explain that in a moment. But obviously, the liar-in-chief, President Barack Obama, really likes him. Listen to this.
Jay has become one of my closest friends and is a great press secretary and a great advisor. He's got good judgment, he has good temperament, and he's got a good heart.
None of the above is true. Jay Carney is the biggest, fattest, baldest-faced liar on Capitol Hill that you'll ever meet. He's a shameless, notorious liar. He has lied so many times and so obviously for this White House that it is literally embarrassing to watch him lie. He's insufferable. And the reason I dislike him so much is because he really symbolizes the total denigration of the White House during the Obama years. The total destruction of everything that the White House is supposed to stand for. The press secretary is there to answer the questions of the people. So the press is there sitting in front of him, especially in many of these, in the daily briefings. They ask questions, and the press secretary is supposed to say the truth about what is going on. Now, it's true, every press secretary will spin things to the advantage of the president. That's true. But there is a fine line between lying and spinning the truth in a positive light. This man was clearly constantly lying. And he obviously has no sense of personal honor, no sense of personal integrity. How many of you would be able to stand in front of the press and talk about Benghazi like he did? Basically saying things about the talking points that were preposterous, about things that were seen and not seen that were absolutely preposterous. Would you have the ability to do that to the American people? If the president asked me to do that for him, I would say, I'm walking. I'm out of here. I'm not going to lie for you. In fact, I would do the opposite. At the White House press briefing, I would say, the president just asked me to lie for him, and I'm not going to, and that is why I'm resigning. I would actually publicly embarrass him over it. Instead, this guy is more interested in himself, like so many people on Capitol Hill, in his own advancement. And so what he wanted to do was speak on behalf of the president for a couple of years and then go make a mint. That's the driving force of so many people who go to Capitol Hill these days. They don't care about the Constitution. They don't care about the political process. They don't care about the institutions that they're in. They don't care to serve the American people. They care about themselves and about the lowest version of themselves. Not their own honor, not their own integrity, but their pocketbook. And that's Jay Carney, a weasel if you've ever seen him. Now, he was so blatantly a liar that the press began to sometimes laugh at him. They were very confrontational with him. And there were this constant back and forth between the two, to the point that often he would screen the questions that were coming to him, and he would reply as though those reporters were carrying water for one point of view or another, instead of representing the questions of the American people. So he began to do his job in a way that was so highly partisan that it was distasteful and ultimately ineffective. He claims in recent interviews that he asked the president if he could leave because he wanted to spend more time with his kids. Now, let me tell you this. Every time a politician or anybody involved in politics is saying that what they really want to do is go home and spend more time with their kids, that's a lie. They don't care about their kids. They hardly see their kids. You know, we should follow him on his next job and see how many hours of work his next job will entail. It'll probably entail as many hours, and he won't see his kids any more than he's seeing them now. He doesn't care about his kids. He doesn't care about his family in terms of being a present father. What he cares about is making money, maybe for them. Okay, let's grant him that. So the real reason is he was pushed out. And why was he pushed out? Because he was ineffective in his job. Because he seemed to be attacking those who are asking him questions. And that's not what the White House press secretary is supposed to do. When asked, well, you know, it seemed like your relationship with so many of the reporters was really confrontational and it descended into bickering. This is what he had to say. Roll it.
Well, Joe, I certainly was not an advocate when I was a reporter. I was sort of old school. But when you work for the president, you are there explaining and defending his policies and positions, which I happen to believe are the right policy and positions. And I think you know, having watched these daily briefings over the years, both during my time and during my predecessor's time, you know, they've become more and more combative. There's a certain element of theater to them. Mike McCurry, one of my predecessors who served President Clinton, has apologized to every one of his successors for being the press secretary who agreed to allow the briefing to be televised in full. And I think that has added to the kind of combative nature of the briefing. But in the end, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the folks in the briefing room, the reporters who work hard every day trying to get it right. And, you know, I feel like I've had a good relationship with them, including those with whom I've had some specific moments of combat.
Well, it looks like serving so closely to the President of the United States, one of the key lessons he has drawn is that when you fail bitterly at your job, don't blame yourself, but blame everybody else. And that's the equivalent of that statement. So he was so dislikable, so ultimately ineffective at what he was doing that even the president had to push him out the door. And what does he have to say for himself? That the real problem is you had television cameras there. And it was the television cameras that caused the reporters to try to seek a moment of theater that would then be reproduced on the evening news. And in fact, a couple of times he said that, say, to Ed Henry that was asking a legitimate question. He said, well, I think what you're really trying to do here is trying to get a snippet for the evening news. Jay, we have news for you. The television cameras have nothing to do with why you failed so miserably at your job. You failed miserably at your job because you didn't seem to grasp that the reporters were asking legitimate questions for which you were often completely unprepared or provided stupid, illogical, or deceitful answers. That's why you failed. And that's why they became more and more antagonistic. They did their job right. I saw so many of those confrontations between Jonathan Karl and Jay Carney and Ed Henry and Jay Carney. And so many times, the questions were the very questions that all of us had on our minds. And what we really wanted was Jay Carney not to represent the stonewalling of the administration, but to provide facts and answers so we could move on to other issues of concern to the American people. So, Jay, the television cameras had nothing to do with it. You failed because, like Barack Hussein Obama, you descended into a bubble in which you began to think that what you are doing, the agenda that you are pursuing, is so far-sighted, so brilliant, that it doesn't necessarily need to be explained in detail to the American people. You failed because ultimately you stopped respecting the American people. And in that lack of respect, you mirror the very lack of respect that our president has for us. Because all of these lies and all of this stonewalling and all of this incompetence shows that ultimately he does not care for us. You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, upholding values that are never going to die.
Well, if you ask me where I come from, here's what I tell everyone. I was born by God's dear grace in an extraordinary place where the stars and stripes and the eagle fly.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.